A lot of Unapologetic is responding to the craziness of the pro-choice movement, whether that's TikTok or Instagram or on college campuses. But I think one of the biggest mistakes we can make as pro-life people is only ever being on the defense. We need to put ourselves into the offense and make the people that we talk to, the pro-choice people, actually prove anything that they say. Because here's the deal. They have a lot to say. They have a lot of questions they're going to ask. They have a lot of analogies they're going to want to share with you. But when the tables are turned and you ask them a question, most of the time they will try to avoid it. And so what I thought we should do is this week, I'm going to give you 5 questions I think you should be asking every single pro-choice person you talk to. 5 questions that will put them in a position where they actually might have to prove a single thing that they say. And the first question that I think you should be asking, and I think it's the most important question, is when does life begin? When does life begin? It's actually probably the really only question that truly matters, because if life begins at conception, then abortion ends the life of an innocent human being and is always wrong. And if life doesn't begin at conception and it's, at birth or at viability or whatever moment, then it's a very different conversation. And so we have to establish this before we have real, honest conversations with people who are pro-choice. But what I want you to do is make them come up with an answer, because their inclination is going to say, well, nobody knows that. There's not a single moment that life begins. It's much more nuanced and complicated than that, and you're naive to think anything else. But here's the deal. Life does begin at a very specific moment, and there is a lot of proof for that. So if their first inclination is to make it sound like that's an impossible thing to prove, then you prove it first. Bring up your phone and type in, "When does life begin, Princeton?" Click that link, read it to them. If they still want to argue with that, then you can reference pretty much every embryology textbook in all of America that will say that life begins at fertilization. You can reference the fact that IVF clinics sure know when life begins. And you can bring up a study that says 97% of scientists agree life begins at conception. So that should be a good little solid handful of evidence that then requires them to bring something up counter. Either something that debunks one of those pieces of evidence or something that says otherwise. They're not going to be able to. They're just not. I was on campus recently and I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth with this person that kept saying life begins at birth, and she finally had to concede that there's not a single piece of evidence that proves what she has to say. So if I were her, I would have been embarrassed to be on a college campus fighting with somebody who had several pieces of evidence to then turn around and say, I know that I have no proof, but I still think that I'm right. Not a good look. So my encouragement to you is to continue to press on that point, because it is a very incredibly important piece of information for us to have to even navigate this conversation at all. The second question I think you should be asking is, what is one way you have supported a pregnant mother that does not include abortion? So the reason I think this is an important conversation is because it can kind of uncover the truth on whether or not somebody is pro-choice or pro-abortion. Because they will say, well, I do a lot to support women. I support women. Well, if you're supporting women, explain to me how you're pro-choice if the only thing you've ever supported a woman in is her right to get an abortion. Because the reality is there's a lot of women who don't want an abortion, who find themselves pregnant, scared, they don't have resources, they don't have a stable relationship to support them. And these pro-choice people think the best thing that they can do for them is to tell them to go get an abortion. So I like to hear from their mouth that they have not done a single thing to actually support women. And it helps me understand their perspective, and it helps me understand the reality of these pro-choice people. So when they want to argue with you and say that they're pro-choice and blah, 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 ask them what they have done that makes them pro-choice and not just pro-abortion. In my experience, I've never met a pro-choice person that has done anything to actually connect a pregnant mother with life-saving resources. I've never seen it. I have seen pro-choice people bomb pregnancy centers. I have seen them demonize organizations that do support women. And so I think it's an important question to ask them. The third question I think you should be asking pro-choice people is, why do women need abortion? And I guarantee you they'll bring up different reasons that they think are justifications for abortion, like, women facing unexpected pregnancies. They didn't want it, so therefore they shouldn't have to have it. Things like poverty or the difficulty of juggling an education or a career with having a baby, whatever it is, what we need to point out to them is those things can be solved. We can support women to where they don't have to choose between their education and their baby or their career and their baby. There are organizations that will help women who are in financially difficult situations. But more importantly, what you're saying is that women are too weak to navigate both of these things. At its root, that's what this argument is saying. So when people say women need abortion for X, Y, and Z, what they're saying is women are incapable of existing without access to abortion. And me personally, as a woman, that's an incredibly offensive thing to say. Yes, things are difficult, but then the response should be making those situations less difficult, not killing your baby and sending you out the door. Because abortion is very traumatic. Abortion is very harmful to women. And so when we use these justifications to say women cannot survive without abortion, what we don't realize is we're making the rest of their existence more difficult. So what we should be doing, our priority, would be solving those issues at hand instead of blaming the child for existing. Like I said, there's organizations that can support women through all of these instances, but to blanket say that women need abortion is an incredibly offensive argument to make. Number 4, are you okay with men using abortion as a tool of abuse against women? This is an uncomfortable question, but it is happening every single day in this country. There have been documented instances of men ordering the abortion pill online, which the abortion movement has continually tried to make easier and easier, that anyone can get their hands on deadly chemical abortion pills. But there is documented proof that men are ordering these pills and drugging women who refuse to get abortions. What are we going to do about that? What are you going to do about that? Are you okay with that, or are you going to speak up about the horrific reality of men using abortion against women? What are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about the men that are threatening women that if they don't get an abortion, they're going to leave them, they're going to hurt them? What are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about the men who are abusing young girls, getting them pregnant, and then walking them into a Planned Parenthood and forcing them to get an abortion to remove any evidence of abuse? What are we going to do about that? It is an incredibly conversation to not only have with pro-choice people, but something that we need to be calling out because of how horrific this is. Women and children are dying at the hands of abusive men who are using abortion as a tool. It is horrific, heartbreaking, and something that 100% needs to be addressed far more often. But it is also a good conversation to have with somebody who supports abortion because they may not know that this is going on. They may not understand the gravity of this issue, and it is an important time to bring it to light. And number 5, do you believe women? Do you believe women? I would say most people would say yes, and you follow up this question with this. If you believe women, then why does your movement neglect and ignore those women who come out and say abortion was the most traumatic, heartbreaking, devastating thing that has ever happened to them and something that they have carried for the rest of their lives? What about those women that say, abortion hurt me? The women who say, everyone told me that abortion would fix my problems and it made them all a million times worse and then made me grieve the life of my child that I lost. What about their stories? What about their voices? Because what I hear is that abortion is empowering, that abortion supports women, that abortion is a women's rights, that abortion is something that should be championed. Well, what that narrative does is leave these women who are broken, struggling, and depressed and anxious in the dust. It silences their voices because it makes abortion look bad. So these poor women who were lied to by the abortion industry, betrayed by them, are now being silenced by them because they don't want to deal with the repercussions of abortion. And that's something that I always bring up to pro-choice people because I will not allow their voices to be silenced. I will not allow their voices to be ignored and neglected in the name of making abortion seem like anything other than a horrific, devastating act of ending the life of an innocent human being. So ask them those questions because I guarantee you, if anything, it will get them thinking. about where they stand on this. Because oftentimes the narrative that they hear is that women need abortion, abortion supports women, abortion fixes problems, whatever the justification is. But the reality of abortion is always ignored. The repercussions and the devastating effects of abortion is always ignored. The ugly, dirty truth of abortion is always ignored. And so we need to bring that to light and to put pro-choice people in a position where they actually have to come to terms with what they believe in.